So the day I saw this on Broadway, I spent the entire day, because I was wearing this t-shirt, singing to myself, "Tommy, we have so much in common," from How to Dance in Ohio. And then after I saw this show, I left the Nederlander Theatre thinking, you know what, Tommy, we do not have enough in common. I think that was the problem here. Oh my god, hey. Welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. My name is Mickey Joe. If you're meeting me for the first time, I am a theatre-themed content creator here on social media. I'm also a professional, international freelance theatre critic. That was too many adjectives. I am usually based in the UK, reviewing shows here in the West End, but occasionally I travel to New York to see as many Broadway shows as I can and review them here on YouTube. And I recently got to go and see the new revival of The Who's Tommy, which was just recently nominated for one single Tony Award, Best Revival of a Musical. It has been, however, getting a lot of positive praise from critics and audience members alike since it opened at the Nederlander, and so I was very intrigued about this. You know, it's one of my musical theatre, it was one of my musical theatre blind spots in that this was not a show that I knew well. And that was a conspicuous omission because this is, you know, it's a significant part of musical theatre history. It's one of musical theatre's great concept rock operas. So if only for that reason, I was excited to go and see The Who's Tommy, but I came to find out that the who is not really the question. The question I had was more why, and also what. And also, why? We will be discussing all of my potentially unpopular opinions about this show and this particular production in today's review. Do not worry, if you enjoy this one and you want to see and hear more of my theatre reviews, make sure to subscribe to me here on YouTube or follow me if you're listening to this in podcast form on whatever podcast platform you are using. I am at Mickey Joe Theatre all over the internet. You can go and find me on your preferred social media platforms for more theatre-themed content. And because theatre is subjective and we all have different opinions, we all respond to art and musical theatre in a different way, I would love for you all to comment down below with your thoughts about The Who's Tommy, either as a show in general or about this particular production, if you have had the opportunity to see it on Broadway or on its previous run at the Goodman Theatre in Chicago. I know this show is beloved by many people. Honestly, my dad would probably have really enjoyed this. If you are one of those people, please convey to me why in the comments section. I really am very curious. But before I get the chance to read your opinions, let's talk about mine. Here is my review of The Who's Tommy, the strangest musical on Broadway. So if I seem at all troubled, it's because I'm about to try and articulate the plot of this show to you. And, you know, like I said, I did not know this show. I did not know this narrative going into the thing. I knew the song Pinball Wizard, which is referenced here on my hat from the merchandise. I did enjoy the merchandise for the show, by the way. You can get that from Creative Goods' website. Not the point. Before we try and unpack the slightly mystifying synopsis of this show, let me tell you a little bit about its history and how it arrived on Broadway as a musical. And now this is going to be a little bit of music history, so I'm going to be learning at the same time as I tell you all of this. But The Who's Tommy was the 1992 stage musical realization of a, I guess, rock opera concept album, which was made in the very late 60s by the band The Who, primarily created by Pete Townsend. Of course, as we learned in the musical You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, man does not live by bread alone. And musicals, stage musicals, do not live by music alone. So for this to go from an album to a stage production, it required an extra ingredient. That ingredient, as it turns out, was the collaborator Des McAnuff, who created the book for the show and was its original director, and interestingly enough, is also the director of this new revival, which I think on balance is a good thing. I think it's exciting for a director to be able to re-examine this piece decades later, like 30 years after it was originally on Broadway, and deliver it to a new audience using new theatrical technology, using potentially a new perspective. We'll get to it, but also one of the most important qualifications for a creative team is an understanding of the material. So who better than the man who helped bring it to the stage in the first place? Anyway, that original production played at Broadway's St. James Theatre for like a decent amount of time. It ran for 2 years. It originally starred Michael Cerveris, and there were some other really exciting names in that company like Alice Ripley and Norm Lewis and Sherry Renee Scott. And at the 1993 Tony Awards, it was nominated for Best New Musical, but it won the Tony Awards for Best Direction, Choreography, Original Score, the score that had been, I guess, written in the late 60s, but why not? Anyhow, the show gained something of a cult status, allowing this revival 3 decades later to be highly anticipated by audiences. But what is it actually about? Well, let me attempt to tell you. Do you know what? I would act this out with the theatrical stuffed animal collection, but I don't actually think it would be appropriate because this takes some twists. So we begin in the future, but then jump almost immediately back to the past, where the majority of the show takes place. It was a sort of a Matrixy style future, but in the past we're in Britain for reasons that are never quite clear to me, and we're in the middle of war. I want to say the second one. It's during this that Tommy's parents meet and fall in love and have a passionate romance, but he has to go off and do war stuff, in which capacity he is captured and held in a prisoner of war camp, only he's missing and presumed dead. And dead is the news that seems to be brought to his, I was going to say wife, they're not married, the mother of his, at that point, I think, unborn child. She's very sad, obvi, has the child. At some point, we jump forwards 4 years. Tommy is now 4 years old. She's celebrating her 21st birthday. Don't think too much about these timelines. And she has a new boyfriend. You know, it's been 4 years. She's allowed to move on. Calm down. This boyfriend seems nice enough, but then we pretty soon find out that he is unsavory and abusive. But with perfect or terrible timing, Tommy's father returns, expecting her to have waited for him by the window. I guess it's been 4 years, slightly unrealistic. Anyway, he's not thrilled to find a different man in the house. This other man in the house is not thrilled to find Adam Jacobs walking in. There is something of a kerfuffle from what I recall, and Tommy's father shoots Tommy's mother's new boyfriend, an act of murder that Tommy witnesses via an enormous mirror. This is very important for reasons that, again, I could not tell you. Ultimately, Tommy's father is found not guilty because the British legal system is less than robust. But sort of understandably, though perhaps not scientifically, as a result of this childhood trauma, Tommy has subsequently become disabled. That is to say, and I'm hoping to use the correct and respectful terminology here because the show definitely doesn't, he is visually impaired and basically non-responsive. He does not speak, and it seems as though he does not perceive sound. In the show, obviously, in the lyrics of Pinball Wizard, they call him deaf, dumb, and blind, but they do so in a way that's disparaging anyway. His parents, now a happy family unit, having pretty swiftly killed the guy who was in the way, are understandably concerned about this. They seek out various treatments and medical advice. Ultimately, they have to move on with their lives. And as we accelerate through the years, we see various scenes from Tommy's adolescence, including a particularly creepy encounter with a babysitter, his sexually abusive uncle who touches him inappropriately, safe in the knowledge that the child is not going to be able to say anything to his parents or anyone else. I told you it wasn't appropriate for me to act it out with bears. If you wanted that, then this is on you. The song is literally called Fiddle About. We're not subtle about this one. That unfortunately is not the only hardship in Tommy's childhood. He is also subjected to a decent amount of bullying and abuse by his cruel cousin and his cousin's friends, but they inadvertently discover that he is exceptionally talented at pinball. Hence the song Pinball Wizard, which I guess was written bespoke for this story. You could have absolutely told me that this was a standalone song that was shoehorned into this show like we see in other jukebox musicals, and I would have believed you, because there is no reason that the act needs to end dramatically and structurally in terms of like how to bring this part of the narrative to a close with them singing euphorically about how good he is at pinball. Like, there is no reason for this other than the fact that that is genuinely the best song in the show. Like, the song slaps, the whole introduction and this melody of it, that ba da 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 ba da 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 ba ba da ba da ba 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 da ba ba da. I was waiting the entire time for it because I knew it was a great song. But even so, carrying on into the second act, and it's possible I've blocked some of this out, eventually it occurs to Tommy's mother to smash the mirror, which magically works, and suddenly he can see and he can speak and he can hear, because apparently he was a cursed Disney princess this entire time, and having lived his entire life thus far as a sensory-deprived pinball god, He then almost immediately becomes a rock star / cult leader because people find his stories so inspiring, which I actually think is the most realistic part of the show. If there's one thing that the masses love more than an inspiring disability story, it's the inspiring story of disabilities magically cured by breaking the evil mirror. He becomes estranged from his parents, and you know what? Kind of fair enough. Oh my god, I missed the most insane part. I truly missed the most insane part of this narrative. I definitely blocked this out. At one point, during his childhood, he is still less than 18 years old at this point, possibly less than 16. I think he's like 12. His father decides that it would be a good idea, and he's a man acting in desperation at this point because, he's lived through a prisoner of war camp, but apparently nothing is harder than having a disabled child. And he, acting on unsavory advice, takes Tommy to the Isle of Dogs, where he engages the services of a prostitute called the Acid Queen, hence the song, in the hopes that she can his disabled son back to normal. Literally, I was ashamed of myself for coming to the initial conclusion that that's what this scene was, and I was literally sat there thinking, I can't believe I thought that's what was happening here, because it's absolutely no, oh no it is what's happening here. That's literally what is happening. Eventually, he decides that this is a bad idea. It's not really clear because so much of this is sung through what he thought was going to happen here. Tommy starts levitating, at which point, arguably he'd have been like, you know what? Clearly you have gifts. But that apparently is meant to be a representation of him literally getting high because she gives him drugs, which evidently is his father's line in the sand, like, have non-consensual sex with my underage son by all means, but giving him drugs, too far. I mean, honestly, they're both bad. Wow, can you imagine if I'd just gone on with the rest of the review and not told you about that part? Wow. Where did I get to? Oh, cult leader, estranged from his parents, and kind of fair enough. He also shames Uncle Ernie, who never really gets his comeuppance, I will say. But we have this little coda on the end where we meet a young girl who is so inspired by Tommy. He's basically Harry Styles to her. She goes and seeks him out at his concert and gets inappropriately close to him and gets injured or gets pushed back by security, and he's like, no, let me get to her, and he takes her to his family home, and then they all go to his family home and he welcomes them all inside because that seems like a good idea. Thankfully, he's a cult leader of a small ensemble of people. Then I'm very hazy on the details at this point, but something he says during this time or something he reveals, and I think it's to do with him trying to convey to them that he's just an ordinary person, no more worthy of worship or deification than anyone else, and they're put off by this, so, they all leave, and that's the end of his reign. And at some point, we flash forwards into the future. We may have already jumped forwards into the future by this point. There is no clear reason as to why, other than just, vibes. That, and I promise you I'm not lying, is the plot of The Who's Tommy. There may be finer details that were lost on me because, even with wide eyes and mouth agape, it's possible to miss stuff, but I'm hoping that provides me and you the necessary context to understand my position in this next section of the review. Let me tell you what I thought about all of this. So I know it's beloved of a generation. This is the thing, and many shows are, and a lot of stuff is. And I was sat there thinking, you know what, my dad would probably really like this. And for a lot of people, I get that it's about the music, and I get that the music is well known and beloved and nostalgic and a guilty pleasure. And I too have shows that, probably don't stand up artistically, but I really enjoy because I discovered them at a young age. And maybe I'm too woke for The Who's Tommy. I don't think that that's a bad thing. Maybe The Who's Tommy is a little bit dated and it doesn't stand up to modern audiences. I mean, there are still people of that generation who first enjoyed it who can go and buy tickets now, and that'll probably serve it very well on Broadway. But people from my generation seeing it for the first time who know nothing about the show may be shook, and honestly for good reason. And I know that there is a conversation unfolding right now on social media about whether or not the show is ableist, and I don't think this is even a conversation that needs to be had because obviously it is. Of course it's ableist. Have you listened to this entire plot? It is so farcically and ridiculously ableist that any attempt to have a nuanced and detailed conversation about the ways in which it could better navigate this just feels so pointless because it is inherently just a really obviously dreadful interpretation of childhood disability. It plays into like every single negative trope and it heads in such shocking directions. And again, I know you like the music. I have a hard time getting to grips with the idea that people are going to this show for this narrative and for this story and taking something from it. It's another one where I'm like, what is this meant to make me feel outside of the impact of stirring rock music? Am I meant to feel empowered by this story? Am I meant to feel inspired by this? Am I meant to feel legitimately unnerved? The whole thing in both its material and in this production is so deliberately overblown and loud that you don't really feel those subtler emotional beats. The closest we get to that is the young girl in the second act and her sort of one-sided parasocial relationship with Tommy, because it affords the show this interesting new dimension. But because Tommy is inaccessible to his parents, he's also inaccessible to us as the audience by extension. Now, he does have a sung presence who then plays Tommy when he gets to that age, but even he is a little bit dispassionate in his performance. And the lyrics are ambiguous and metaphorical and unhelpful when you don't have a script to go along with them. Because where we as an audience hunger for some kind of an insight as to how Tommy is feeling beneath this exterior, we get lyrics like, "A vague haze of delirium creeps up on me. All at once a tall stranger I suddenly see. He's dressed in a silver-sparkled glittering gown, and his golden beard flows nearly down to the ground." And I'm like, okay. And yet at the same time, this inability to deliver much nuance within the storytelling doesn't really matter because there is very little depth in this story and in these characters. It's only really Tommy who we kind of want to have any kind of dimension, and he attains some in the second act when he, magically is able to speak and immediately turns into a cult leader, and we find that he has resentments based on the memories of his childhood, but his parents are just sort of singularly exasperated and frustrated. His uncle is just creepy, and his cousin is just cruel. The girl is just an adoring fan. Don't get me started on the Acid Queen. Like, none of these characters have any kind of depth to them. This narrative doesn't have any kind of weight or impact. What is this show? And so I think I am the case study here for if you separate it from its nostalgia and you look at the sum of the parts of what is left, it's kind of a confusing mess that feels inherently, and I know you're not going to like me saying this, deeply problematic. Clearly, I'm too woke for Tommy. I'm embracing it at this point. What I do want to do is give credit to this hardworking creative team, because the material notwithstanding and the plot of this show notwithstanding, the way it's actually being realized on stage, I think is very impressive on a handful of fronts. Let's talk more about that. So the fact that I'm able to perceive as much of this storytelling as I am comes from the careful work of Des McAnuff, that there is so much in the introduction to establish the premise and these characters, and the indicators are all there. When I got the sense that the uncle was about to do something creepy, that then happened. When I got the sense that the father was taking his son to the Acid Queen for that exact reason and then felt bad because I worried that I'd jumped to conclusions, I jumped to the right conclusion, and that is an indicator of, good direction, laying those foundations for like suggesting tone and like this is what this scene is about to be. And that again is a very helpful quality to have in a sung-through rock opera. It's important to be able to convey storytelling however you can. The choreography was by Lauren Lotario, my favorite moments of which were these sort of larger formation sequences using the entire company. It had this sort of a futuristic and militaristic quality to it. I enjoyed that. The set design was by David Corrins. It was more set light and more projection heavy, the projections having been designed by Peter Negrini, but again, it afforded that slightly futuristic quality, however inexplicable that may be. Sarafina Bush's costume design was fun, again playing with militaristic imagery as we headed into the second act and into this futuristic moment, playing an awful lot with color and with monochrome, and then expressive use of individual colors, and the word of the day was yellow. Amanda Zeev's lighting design looks great, but my favorite creative element of all of this, I think, was the sound design and everything adjacent to the music here. The sound design was by Gareth Owen, who always does a fantastic job. It sounded great. I liked what they were doing pre-show with this sort of a white noise quality, and then sort of the depth of the silence that came after that as contrast, and being hit by this wall of sound is exactly what I want from this kind of a musical. If you are a rock opera, I want you to just like shoot me in the face with the volume of the thing, because as we've established, if we're not basking in the music, then we have to pay attention to what's going on, and therein we have problems. I want to talk about every music-adjacent person who is listed in this playbill. So John Miller was the music coordinator, the music supervisor, and additional arrangements, Ron Melrose, the music direction and additional orchestrations, Rick Fox, the bulk of the orchestration, Steve Margoshes. Who else? Oh, I mean, additional music credited to John Entwistle and Sonny Boy William II. If I've neglected to mention anyone from the music team, then I apologize, because that really did sound great. You know what? Let's talk about the orchestra. I have their names as well. Kevin Ramasar, Mark Berman, Amanda Morton, Priscilla Reinhardt, Kevin Kuhn, Irio O'Farrell, Javier Diaz, and Jim Widlowski. Shout out to them. Like I said, it sounded great. But here is the thing with that, is you can love the music. That is not enough for me in a Broadway show that has a narrative. And I don't need everything to have a narrative. I think I maybe would have rather this been more abstract, like Hair, because it was the narrative itself that bothered me. It sort of committed the cardinal sins of being shallow and one-dimensional and offensive simultaneously. And if you want to go enjoy the music, go listen to the cast album, go listen to the original record. If you want to go enjoy the music in a live setting, go listen to a tribute concert. Go and let someone produce Studio 54 sings The Who's Tommy, or do it in a larger venue, do it in a rock concert somewhere. I don't care what you do. But if you're going to be at the Nederlander Theatre on Broadway, and I promise I'm not just sad because Shucked closed, I think everything, has its time, but if you're going to do this in a Broadway house, it has to be about more than just the music. Anyway, we are going to move on, because I would like to tell you about the performances of this hardworking cast. Now, the bulk of my praises here are going to be for leading man Ali Lewis Borsky, who I think is an exceptional and exciting talent among many other exciting young men currently in the Broadway sphere, like Casey Likes and like Liam Pearce from How to Dance in Ohio. They should all do a buddy musical where they fight crime. What I like a lot about Ali is diversity of vocal tone, because he has this really interesting depth to his voice and this really affecting low range, which is very nostalgic. He's very well suited to this music, which sounds very much of its time, which I like. I like music of that era. That is no bad thing. But he has that great flip where it has that kind of interesting lower tone that's very like, don't you forget about me, like the lead singer from Simple Minds. It sounds as though he's going to be a baritone, and then the quality of it sort of changes when we get into this very strong upper range. It's a very exciting voice. It's very of that era. And he's giving you a very committed and passionate performance on stage. I just think there's only so far that he can go with it, because it is a little bit emotionally dispassionate at the beginning, and he is just giving you just like wide-eyed intensity and singing this excellent music and doing a great job of it, and he gets a little bit of a journey in the second act. But even the character that he turns into in the second act of the thing, because he's, I guess, scarred by the first act of the show, as we all are, he's still quite withdrawn and repressed, and he doesn't really get to play all that much. And this is probably a note I have about much of the rest of the company, if I'm being honest, is that they are either getting to play these melodramatic, emotional moments, or they're getting to play sort of snide, ridiculous caricatures. There is not a lot of room for subtlety. There's almost no room for subtlety in this show, if I'm being completely honest. They also, many of them, have questionable British accents, which obviously I'm going to be paying more attention to or have more of an ear for than your average Broadway American theatre goer, the same way that I'm less perceptive about dreadful American accents coming from British performers in the West End. But there was one person who I thought had a pretty good one. He was the second person to sing in Pinball Wizard, and I'm determined to tell you who it is. It was not the first person to sing in Pinball Wizard, I will say that much. Jeremiah Alsop. I think it was you. I think that was the person who I decided had a decent British accent. Everyone else, yeah, they're all questionable. And I did get to thinking, other than, the history of the piece and some of the lyrics in the song Pinball Wizard, and probably a lot of other lyrics as well, I don't see why you couldn't just relocate the thing to, I don't know, like the suburban Midwest, perhaps, or New Jersey, somewhere, just like some sort of a suburban setting, like he goes to the Second World War and he comes back. Americans did that too, and I'm pretty sure that lyric in Pinball Wizard I'm thinking of says something about Soho down to Brighton, and New York has both of those places. There's a Soho in Manhattan and there's a Brighton in Brooklyn. Or you could just rewrite a couple of lyrics like many a jukebox musical has, like many a musical has when it's been revived. Look at Merrily We Roll Along, that's the most celebrated revival on Broadway right now. That's rewritten half of its lyrics for no real reason. My point is, you would save yourself the headache of all of these attempts at British accents if you just relocated this insane story to somewhere in the US. There is no reason for this to be taking place in Britain, unless maybe it allows an American audience to separate themselves from the nonsense of it all by being like, oh, they're just wacky like that in England. And you know what? We still have a royal family in 2024, and we do a lot of weird things, but we're not wacky like that. You're the ones reviving this show right now. That's on you, people. Anyway, I was telling you about the performances. So Adam Jacobs and Alison Luff play Tommy's parents. Unsurprisingly, they both sound great. You know, I believe a lot. I think they do their best work, honestly, in like the first 15 minutes of this show when they are establishing everything. And I believe Alison Luff's concern for her son, and I believe her heartbreaking response when he leaves and then when he comes back later. I believe all of that. And I think as well, they are just inhibited from playing the extents of the depth that you might want to see from this kind of a parent-child relationship, and the extents of the strain and the exhaustion, the frustration, and everything else that we shouldn't really be centering on in a story about disability, but that's really neither here nor there. Again, there's not a lot of room for nuance in this conversation, but they don't really have the capacity to play that in this material. Bobby Conte plays Tommy's cousin, who principally delivers the song Pinball Wizard, as well as other numbers in the first act, and then becomes the leader of his, like, secret police for whatever reason. And he reads a little bit older here. You know, it feels less like a teenage bully and more like yet another adult abusing Tommy because he reads older, and I think a little bit of that gets misinterpreted a little bit. Christina Sajou plays the Acid Queen, as well as other roles within the company, and she really only gets this one big standout moment. She sounds fantastic. I've seen Christina before filming the second act of SpongeBob in Plymouth randomly. I think she's a really exciting and dynamic performer. I would love for her to have more in the show. And in the second act, we meet Haley Gustafsson, who plays the young lady who is hugely enamored with Tommy, and I enjoy her performance. I think we find a little moment of honesty there in and amongst the noise of the rest of this show. She only, again, gets to play really this one thing, but there's a vulnerability and there's a sort of a very genuine affection about it that I did appreciate. And yet the great vocals, the bright lights, the fantastic sounding band, and the genuinely compelling and stirring music, and even the strongest moments of direction and choreography could not salvage what was, for me, a truly inexplicable evening at the theatre. This show was baffling to me on so many fronts because the story matters. I can already hear you commenting that it's nostalgic and it's about the music, and maybe I need to go and watch the movie and I don't appreciate it for what it is. I don't know. I don't know what I am missing here, because I know that this show has been enjoyed and is beloved, and the audience loved it. Like, this show does something that Come From Away also does, where there are very few moments to break for applause. So by the time the end rolls around, you haven't been able to clap that many times. So before the show ends, the entire company is standing in a line, singing. The harmonies are great, it's loud, it's bright, it's volume, it's what the show does well, and people stand up and start spontaneously applauding because it kind of looks like a curtain call, even though it isn't one, and people are on their feet and they are clapping, and people are overjoyed all around me, and I'm just insurmountably confused. And at the peak of this, my favourite moment, two women who are sat pretty near the front, expensive, great seats, turn around and walk out. The show has not finished yet. It's moments from finishing. People are standing on their feet and clapping, and I guess they have places to be. It's Manhattan, and it's a Tuesday night at 9:30. Not the point. Anyway, if any part of me wondered if they were walking out because they weren't completely satisfied with it, that was put to rest when I overheard them loudly saying, "Wonderful, just wonderful." So this was a premature walk out from a show, not out of dissatisfaction, but because, their already sky-high levels of enjoyment couldn't be surpassed. Like, there is nothing else that they could stay for that they would enjoy more. They may as well leave. They have had enough, in the sense that's like they couldn't possibly see any more. That was perfect. So even though I found very little to enjoy about this, evidently, what do I know? At which point it feels like a great time to once again remind you to comment with all of your thoughts and feelings about this show down below. Please, for my sanity, I genuinely need to understand what it is about this show that I am missing here. What do you love about it? What are people enjoying about this? Let me know, because I have several questions. In the meantime, I hope that you have enjoyed sharing in this confusion with me and that you have enjoyed today's new review. Make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more Broadway and West End reviews coming very soon. They will be more straightforward than this one, I promise. And I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!